Thanks, Andres. Thanks, Audrey and Anthony, for this invitation to also rediscuss some of the thesis, the content of this book that came out last year for Verso. I would like to go to one of the central research theses of the book that is precisely about the question of which theory of automation we have today, which kind of framework we use to explain the development of technology, not simply AI. And I think my book take a partisan perspective, what is called the labor theory of automation. And I do that aware that is a kind of partisan research perspective that sometimes I think is necessary, to start a conversation. So what is the labor theory of automation? You can also call it in a less maybe partisan way, a theory that explains technological development starting from the matrix, the diagram of social relation and behaviors. A theory of automation based on practice, starting from practice rather than, for instance, from the application of science from above. And this is not, of course, my innovation, my original idea. I have to say that I was also inspired by the work of Lorraine Dustin, that will be a guest in one of the next episodes. Lorraine Dustin, if I remember correctly, was in 2018, but also in an article she wrote in 1994 for Critical Inquiry. And then in a lecture she gave in Washington about the influence of the idea of division of labor on modern computation. I mean, her work and the work of Simon Scheffer on Babbage experiment in modern computation have been quite influential. But okay, the labor theory of automation, I was about to say, is something that I was inspired to develop from many authors, but then I somehow wanted to consolidate it and to extend it to the current regime of artificial intelligence today. The labor theory of automation was introduced and used by political economists of different political orientation already in the 19th century, during the industrial age, and before. Adam Smith, Charles Babbage, and Karl Marx, all from different political perspectives, have maintained a similar perception of technological development. They argue that the design of a machine was emerging, imitating the diagram, the abstract configuration of a previous division of labor, that the design of a machine was emerging gradually after routine of movement, of body part, of tools, a mechanical part that finally constituted as a sort of emergence process, a machine. This theory, as I said, originated from the political economy of the 19th century, and somehow we forgot it. And then I thought it was, in my opinion, one of the best ways to describe also the evolution of artificial intelligence, and to read somehow the development of the project of artificial intelligence, not as a problem, not as a scientific problem, for instance, to imitate intelligence, but as a problem of labor automation. So to somehow demystify the perception that AI is about the imitation of biological, logical, or human intelligence, but it's about indeed the problem of labor automation. You could say that it's quite an industrial perspective, mine, but I think was one of the best way, in my opinion, to unpack also the mystery, the ideology, the mystification that we have today around automation. But before going into the age of AI, I would like indeed to do a bit of prehistory of the theories of automation that we have today. And I think we had a discussion before we started tonight with Andres. So we don't have only a labor theory of automation. If you look specifically to political economy or to the history of science and technology, we have different paradigms to explain technological development. For instance, if you allow me to do some kind of butcher philosophy and simplify things, we can say that in political economy, we have value theory of automation, labor theory of automation, and standpoint theory of automation. So the value theory of automation are indeed theories of automation that explain technological development as something driven only from capital interests. Capitalism, economy requires more powerful technologies to accelerate production. And basically, capitalism, according to a Darwinian logic, select the best design from the outside. This is a theory shared by Marxist political economists, but also neo-Schumpeterian position. It's shared by many economists today, I would say. The labor theory of automation is, as I said, a theory that developed in the 19th century, but we could mention that, for instance, an important economist of the 20th century, like Harry Braverman, his book, Labor and Monopoly Capital, described technological development according to the fact that is something moved by the diagram of social relation, not just from a kind of pressure coming from the outside, from economic interest only. We can mention many authors aside Braverman. We can also, I was thinking sometimes of Friedrich Pollock, his book Automation of 1956, that have somehow also inspired some of the Frankfurt School scholar. Siegfried Gideon, Mechanization Takes Command. There are, other authors that somehow look at the development of technology according to this perspective that was not just merely an economic one. Then we have another family of theories that are the standpoint theory. Take the term standpoint from feminist studies, where standpoint stress this also antagonistic relation of subjectivities with technology, and the fact that indeed automation is also driven by hierarchies of class, gender, and race. And here we have a long debate that started, with the debate on Luddism, with the machinery question. And I think, feminist theories have been developed, many of them. You can think of Ruth Schwartz-Cowan in the 80s, but also Astra Taylor more recently with her idea of Foxtumation. I'm just mentioning standpoint theory of automation, feminist theory of automation, because we're probably the first to also unpack the sphere of productive labor and to connect it to the sphere of reproductive labor, and to show how also technology were used to make women work more rather than less, and to show so for the first time the ambivalence of the regime of automation. I'm saying this to try to broaden up the perspective. I go very fast here. I think we could mention that in the history of science and technology, we have indeed also different schools of thought to describe technological development. We could define internalist schools to describe scientific development, thinking of Thomas Kuhn, constructivist school or externalist theories of automation that would describe indeed automation according to the complex diagram of economic relation. While I'm trying to make this spectrum of different theories, that is so I have a work that you have to help me to finish, because it's quite ambitious. I think it's important maybe in the discussion to try to open up this diagram. I think that when we look at the rise of artificial intelligence today in its form as machine learning, we have something like the consolidation of these theories somehow. I think when we talk about artificial intelligence, we say some authors, I think of Domingos in his book, The Master Algorithm, that I don't like particularly, but many computer scientists define machine learning as the automation of automation. It means a process in which the design of automation somehow automated itself. But I think we can be a bit more precise and say that artificial intelligence today represents somehow the embodiment, the incarnation of that principle of automation that was already discussed and discovered in the 19th century. But when I stress that the labor theory of automation or a practice-based theory of automation is the best way to approach AI, somehow this is also confirmed by the current architecture of artificial intelligence, that is totally a social configuration. And we see clearly this parasitic relation between AI algorithm and the social data on which they have to be trained, the incredible production of information data from online and offline users, workers of any kind, for this pipeline that extract data and transform data into statistical model for machine learning. This is clearly a good description of a social configuration that seems very similar to me to what was the relation in the 19th century between machine and the division of labor. We are within a very complex machine today, much more grandiose and abstract compared to the 19th century. But I see a continuity of this of these processes. But I think we can find this social configuration of AI up to its core. One of the things I do in the book is to look at the social history, indeed, the social origin of the algorithm themselves. I go very fast here, but probably I'm sure many of you are familiar with these many histories of AI that we find today in bookstores that are often technical histories of AI that describe the making of the invention of new algorithm according, to some kind of transformation that happened in computer science or in mathematics. To me, it's very interesting to realize that at the very beginning of the deep learning revolution that started in different stages, we'll say, I mean, the three milestones of the deep learning history are the invention of the perceptron in the 50s by Frank Rosenblatt, Jan LeCun algorithm for the recognition of numbers, figures on letters for the US Post Office in 1989, and then the invention of AlexNet, this algorithm that by Geoffrey Hinton and his students that won the ImageNet competition in 2012. These are the three milestones that we could repeat to frame the history of AI. But it's intriguing for me that at the very beginning, when Frank Rosenblatt invented the perceptron, the issue was not simply to imitate biological neural network with artificial neural network, to build a machine that would imitate biological intelligence. But what Rosenblatt did took the statistical techniques, the tools and tricks of psychometrics, that was a branch of psychology, that somehow consolidated the IQ test, the statistical test to measure intelligence, took those tools, those statistical tools basically developed by psychometrics to define indeed hierarchies of intelligence in society, and use the same tool, the tools of multivariable analysis, to solve the problem of image recognition, pattern recognition. So I see that somehow, if we look attentively at the history of artificial intelligence, but of those algorithms that became successful, that indeed produced some sort of micro industrial revolution, we find a social configuration at the very core. This is in brief, sort of very fast overview of the framework I tried to use to write this history of artificial intelligence. The subtitle of my book is A Social History of AI, but I have to admit that originally it was supposed to be titled A Social Technical History of Artificial Intelligence. Then obviously the editor suggested a more popular subtitle. And the social technical history that I had in mind was precisely an attempt to map this entanglement, to map this relation between the social form and technical form. And I would like to conclude this brief overview with another reflection that we can expand maybe in the Q&A. To me, the fact that the machine has to respond very often to the design of social relation is something quite obvious that I see also in the history of cybernetics. If you take basic principle of cybernetics, like the fact that the internal state of the machine has to adjust to the input coming from the environment, is very similar to that kind of explanation of automation we are looking forward. And this idea of cybernetics, that a machine has to adapt the internal state to the external world, that's something that escalates with, indeed, artificial neural networks, and today with large AI models. If you think of this large parameterized machine made of trillion of parameters that they have to adjust to the external data, but they continually to adjust and to imitate the configuration of social relations. So I think, from my point of view, I see a kind of common development of technology across in the last 2 centuries. And I follow this indeed, as I said before, to demystify the idea that the problem of AI is a problem of logical or biological intelligence. I think we have to reframe completely this approach, and maybe indeed question or remove completely the term intelligence in this presentation of the problem today. Audrey, I would stop here. I hope it was clear enough.
Yes, you can. You may. No problem. We've got plenty of material to work on. I'll let Andres ask the first question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matteo. That was great. And I really enjoyed reading the book. I learned a huge amount. It covers so much material. So I'm really pleased that we have the chance to explore some of that with you today. I want to pick up actually on your final comment about intelligence, and maybe I definitely like to get into a discussion about automation and social relations, but I think it's helpful to just take a few step backs and focus for a moment on this concept of intelligence, because you make the claim in the book that it doesn't make sense to speak of an inner logic of intelligence as such, so something like the logic of intelligence in the brain, abstracted away from its socio-cultural context. So I was wondering if you could just say something more about how you're understanding the concept of intelligence in the book and how you see the relation between different kinds of intelligence and different kinds of knowledge.
Okay, that's a big question. I would say maybe we should mention that the project of AI developed according to different logics and different epistemologies. AI, the term AI, artificial intelligence, as it was used in the 1950s, introduced by McCarthy, Dartmouth College, was basically the idea that it was possible to build a machine that could imitate human intelligence, because human intelligence can be translated into a mathematical logic then being operationalized by Boolean gates, and the whole tricks that Shannon introduced. And then from Boolean logic, you could indeed implement in transistor, valves, and so on. There, the paradigm was a paradigm mostly inspired by the linearity of electronic media, but also by the linearity of propositional logic. That was a kind of, basic postulate. That model failed because of, issue of computational explosion, as we know, right? So that kind of model that somehow dreamed to automate human intelligence as logical proposition following deductive logic failed. Then something else was developed. I mentioned too briefly the experiments by Frank Rosenblatt, the invention of the perceptron, the beginning of machine learning, as the automation of statistical tools, as the automation of multivariable analysis, the idea that it's not necessary to indeed write representative statement, as you say, representation of the world through propositional logic, but it's better, to have a kind of statistical modeling of external data, right, in a vector space, and to play some tricks of multidimensional geometry to manipulate this space. That's another model of, intelligence. But if we go back, however, at the very beginning, I think indeed we have to admit that also the project of artificial intelligence started with a sort of, with the imitation game of Turing, right? And I think the Turing test, as Simon Scheffer also discussed, I think in January this year, in this interview that you find on YouTube, the Turing test has to be understood as a demonstration that the problem of intelligence is only a problem of relational intelligence, right? So the fact that the human or machinic intelligence is just a matter of social relation and convention that have to be mapped. So I mentioned these cases to show that there are like perspective of intelligence that are internalist. They look like a sort of internal logic, what would be human intelligence, and other that look at the external features of intelligence. But I have to say that, as I suggested before, we remove the term intelligence, we just focus on this mapping of social relation. And what we have today, in my opinion, is the fact that statistical tools, the automation of statistics became successful because it was the most performative, the most powerful tool to map yeah, the explosion of information, but also the explosion of social relations that are continuously mapped by data and information today. I don't know if I answered your question, Andres, but I think when we talk about intelligence, we have quickly demystified and somehow abandoned the term, and also using some inspiration even from Turing to say that the problem of intelligence indeed is a problem of social relations.
So would you suggest maybe we just replace the term altogether with something like knowledges or logics, or is there another concept which you think can be mobilized in place of the idea of intelligence?
I think the problem is, this is what I'm fighting against, and also the project I'm running in Venice is about fighting the anthropomorphism that we project towards all these machines. I repeat, I think the problem of intelligence is simply the problem of our relation with the world. But in terms of collective production of knowledge, of collective production of relation, and it is a problem of dialectical relation between our mind and the world itself that we want to transform. And it's not, I think, a problem of logic per se. This is my opinion. So I don't approach the problem of AI, as I try to say in my book, also as a problem of logic. And then I have some tools like this, statistical tools that became very successful with machine learning, that are indeed a form of spurious logic, very approximate, that are very efficient to map our relation with the world. I think the form of intelligence that we have today in AI, we have to be clear, is quite a specific epistemic form that is statistical modeling, and more precisely, algorithmic statistical modeling. And that's the form of AI today. That's all the problems come from that, all the problem of bias, all the problem of hallucination. But I don't see it as a problem of intelligence. I would say modeling, Andres, to give a short answer. I think we have to take this problem of modelization, of modeling from the history of science, from the history of statistics, from the history of computing, and using this term rather than intelligence. So it's a problem of word modeling, let's say.
Great. Audrey?
Thank you. May I mean, first of all, it's great in that, this reframing is very much needed, and you show how, the way we perceive intelligence, AI, and derive from that intelligence with a capital I, is not inevitable, and you rehistoricize it very, very well. I wanted you to comment, and if you could possibly elaborate on something you mentioned in your book, but you don't go into great detail, and I was left most intrigued by it. When you talk about the tension, you mentioned that twice in your book, the tension between autonomy and automation, and and you talk about, autonomy understood as the power to invent a new rule, automation, the blind following of a rule. And you mention on 2 occasions, the destiny of the automation of intelligence cannot be seen as separate from the political drive to autonomy. And finally, what is at the core of the labor theory of automation is ultimately a practice of social autonomy. So if you could tell us more about that. Thank you.
Oh, those are like very ambitious political statements, but it's the problem of the dream of automation, of the think of the early cybernetics. And what I try to do in the book, that I admit is a bit not very systematic, but what I try to do in the book is not to repeat the stories we know about cybernetics. And I discover all this event on self-organizing networks, on self-organizing theory that were developed within the cybernetic circles, also still financed by DARPA, by the Navy, by the military, but vaguely and rarely mapped. I think also Margaret Bowden, in the monumental history of AI that she wrote, she overlooked this aspect. And that those meetings, those research on self-organizing network and self-organizing machine, were very crucial also in the development of the early artificial neural network research, but also in the development of the idea of ARPANET, the progenitor of the internet. So the idea that, of a network structure, machines of network that could readjust their nodes and so on. We're talking about, discussion they had within the Navi-funded project in the 50s and the 60s. But I was intrigued by the fact that indeed these cyberneticians had a dream of automation. And somehow this dream of automation for me is always related to the social context outside, and the fact that also societies have dreams of automation, autonomy, so in that sense. And I think I'm intrigued by this utopia of sometimes of the humans to build a perfect machine, able indeed even to develop intelligence, consciousness, and so on. We use this term autonomy, but if you go back to the original etymological root in Greek, autonomos means who is able to give itself a rule, but specifically to invent and to apply a new rule in the sense of self-government of a city or self-government of a state or a collective. And I think machines are never capable of this. And I try then to bring this discussion to the debate about today on the intelligence of AI, but also on the autonomy of technology in general, but also the potential autonomy of AI. And if you look at repeat, the architectures of all the technologies that have been described as autonomous, I think that we always see how they were very quite spurious form of autonomy, of automation, even because they've been always implying the human in the loop or the parasitic relation with energy sources and so on. So I was trying to criticize probably, the myth of technological autonomy, the myth of the autonomy of the technosphere, has some people using the in the Anthropocene debate, but also the myth of the singularity, right? And I think I tried to do a bit of psychoanalysis of technological autonomy, in the sense that is always a dream that try indeed to control or overcode politically a social dream for autonomy. There's something else. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that part was one of the most controversial in the book, right? If you want to try to map, algorithm for self-organization and drives that come from society in the same years.
What I found particularly interesting is that how in the 60s, from the 60s to the 70s, you show that there's this flip, and that's so very clever, so very brilliant, how, this dream of how automation flips from being what is a potentially authoritarian source, which oppresses us, to potential for emancipation, actually. So I thought that was quite, recuperated by counterculture and so on and so forth. But yes, the question of autonomy and driving us to, practice of social autonomy, that's obviously contestable today in today's context. Anyway.
No, but the issue of social autonomy for me is crucial, because I think today the problem of technology, and this is also, for instance, the debate on AI ethics, the way we discuss AI, all the policies, the recent AI Act, that just passed by the European Parliament. I think my modest proposal, very humble, nothing revolutionary, is the fact that if we keep the idea, so if we maintain the idea that in all these technologies, they imitate a social design, so to speak. Let me use this term. If the design of technologies mirror the social, I think the way to intervene in the technology is to change first the web of our social relation. And maybe the technology we will develop in the future would be different. So the political issue is at the core, is in society, is the social abstractions that cross society before they are like crystallized in technological abstraction. And I say crystallized because I think the problem that we have today is indeed, or we had also in the past, is when technologies, but also institutions, they indeed crystallize and and I don't have any better term than crystallize, they freeze a specific configuration of power and they maintain like that. And we see also today with AI models, large AI models that are becoming this power structure made of data center, algorithm, computing power, and we see how they also freeze and crystallize collective knowledge and collective culture, and they produce the hallucination they produce because they're made in that way, often with the wrong training, often with, trained with bullshit posts found on Reddit and so on. So I think the issue of social, I'm remaining optimist because I see that AI can be transformed from the outside, maybe.
Thank you very much, Andres.
Yeah, I'd like to, I have lots of related questions, but I think the one I'd like to ask first is about, it's about this sense in which what you describe as this crystallization might function as a kind of socially inhibiting force working against change. Because I'm thinking about the way that Marx talks about real subsumption as a social process in which, if you like, the social relations of capitalism become objectively embedded into the structure of technology. So the machinery, for example, presupposes, if you like, a certain way of working, which is a capitalist way of working. And so as the technological structure through which a society functions increasingly reflects those social relations, we, if you like, become locked in to a certain way of doing things. So I was wondering if you think that AI and these large language models are doing something similar. They're, if you like, locking us into an informational and technological reality that presupposes certain kind of capitalist forms of power.
No, Andres, I think you frame it very well. And I think we can use this also to develop another perspective on AI. And a materialistic critique of AI, I think, has to start from the analysis of the real social configuration we have around AI. If we take the case of ChatGPT, right? Rather than thinking that it's a problem of imitation of intelligence once again, you could start to map ChatGPT looking at how people interact with this thing. And you see more than millions of users around the world, around the planet, connected to a data center in Utah where this model is running. Maybe now they use more data center, but just to give an example, right? That you have a multitude of users, workers connected to an automaton centralized, right? But it's interesting what they do with this. So we think that is the game of intelligence. These are students, workers, people working for, companies, for, graphic designer offices and so on. They use ChatGPT to automate microtasks in their daily routine, right? So they are precisely embedded in this relation that is part, I think, of an international division of labor. So it's like the issue of formal subsumption goes at the planetary scale. We are all connected to a large machine. But what is interesting is then is the composition of this labor. Today, I think in the sociology of labor, you have terms like micro work. And today it's clear that when we talk about AI, we talk about the automation of micro tasks. And these workers, users, our students also, they become this, I don't know, to call it meta worker or sort of cyber worker that make the synthesis of microtasks, of the automation of microtasks, right? So we have this metabolic relation with large language models or whatever, right? To automate microtasks that are part of our daily routine in our life for translation, but also at work. And so I think this is the new form of this formal subsumption you were describing, right? So this is a very complex relation with the machine. It's like the relation of body and mind. And as a synthesis of this myriad multitude of microtasks when we interact with what people call AI. I think that would be a better way, a materialistic critique of AI as social configuration that is indeed, as said, not a matter of intelligence per se, but in this case of microtasks automated by statistical tools, often with a lot of bias and hallucinations.
Audrey, would you like to jump in? Yes, I'll jump in on that actually. And thank you very much for reminding us that this is not a matter of intelligence and the pure automation often done by people who are hidden away. I mean, you talk about, you refer to the work by people like Lily Irani and, by ghost workers and so on. And you in the final pages of your book, you talk about, you introduce the term disconnectionism and the task of undoing, something that would help us interrupt the invisibility. Could you elaborate on that, what you see as the potential of emancipation, and also perhaps, how can we build from those, how can we change the social structures whilst perhaps, reshaping AI to help us design better lives? Not at all ambitious question here.
This is another easy question. No, I think we have to go back maybe to this issue of the configuration of labor today, of work, of our relation with this machine. So Deconnectionism is probably a poetic metaphor or easy slogan imitating connectionism, but it's probably related to this molecular dimension, right, of our relation with this machine. So it's again, I have stuck in my mind this automation, not of indeed, for instance, indeed not the replacement of full figures as worker, right? AI is not coming to replace workers in the entirety, but automating micro tasks that compose what is the routine of a worker. So it's like, and will produce, for instance, more stress, will make people work more rather than less. And because this is a way I think this is the way to frame the problem. So I see this molecular activation and this action at the molecular level of microtasks. So I think the connection would be about mapping this case. And I think today the sociology of labor, all the scholars and colleagues we have that are mapping platform capitalism, gig economy, all these platforms that are often AI platforms in which that they produce continuously new figures of worker like riders, bikers, walkers like we have in Venice and others. I think that would be a way to enter this more, molecular, granular dimension of the composition of labor today. Then the point remains a political question, how you redefine relation of labor today, you redefine redistribution of wealth and welfare. But I think I see the problem as starting in it from the society, from the community level, from problem of the social fabric, rather than the technological fabric. I don't know. I hope I try to map this dystopian world, this dystopian social fabric that is produced also by the AI configuration of social relations. So we talk about AI, we look at this algorithm, but on the other side, we have quite a dystopian social fabric from my point of view.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we want to open the floor to questions from the audience now, unless Andres, you have another question to ask.
Yeah, no, I think let's do that. So for everyone who's here with us in the audience, please do add your questions via the Q&A box and we'll work through them in turn. So the first question we have is from Paul Joseph Rivera Carlisle, who asks, are you interested or do you find relevant any post-humanist approaches to AI?
I think the post-humanist approach to AI, I don't find it very interesting myself. So we could be more precise about what is post-humanism, but I think no, I don't find it particularly interesting. I think this is bringing in a wrong direction in the different flavor of what post-humanism is. Maybe we can clarify which sort of posthumanism, which position regarding AI. I don't know if people are talking about, for instance, recently Bostrom's Institute was closed down in Oxford, right? I think also for issue of scientific accuracy, in my opinion. So that is also my idea that, for instance, Bostrom's book, Superintelligence, I don't find it very scientific. I find it very speculative often. I don't know if this is part of the family of posthumanism. I mean, trying to speculate about machines becoming super intelligent once author. I don't know. There are many we can mention. So I don't work map particularly with posthumanism. Then there is the debate. Sometimes it's becoming, we had a conference a few days ago in Potsdam, the machine of the social, in which, there are some scholars trying to advocate for recognizing almost, AI agents as social agents, right? So I think there are some dangers there. I think there is a danger to reconstruct social relation in an ideological way.
So another question from an anonymous member of the audience is, in the midst of these quite dystopian thoughts, what might AI in the service of society look like?
So could you repeat? Because I have some issue with the environment noise here.
So in the midst of these quite dystopian thoughts, what might AI in the service of society look like?
I think we use already, the power of this technique. As I said, we have to be more precise and to call AI a form of statistical modeling. we model the climate statistically already. So we use this technique in other fields and in other problematics, and statistics is not necessarily a bad thing itself as a tool. We have, however, the problem that when you apply these tricks and tools for the statistical modeling, for instance, of language, you produce these large language models that are often considered source of true knowledge or true scientific perspective. So sometimes I meet students, they want to inquire or use ChatGPT to solve problem of climate science. So you have to understand that ChatGPT is built on textual sources, right? And then they don't produce word models according to a causal logic, but they're basically, statistical inference starting simply from language. And the idea that would be able themselves to produce causal model of the words, real world model, just starting from simple abstracts of newspaper article, it's wrong, logically speaking. So I think there are a good and bad use of this AI tools for society. And when we look at as I said, at the application of statistical modeling, for instance, climate science is a good example, but we use them continuously in different fields. Maybe medicine for sure would be highly benefited by this application. But as I said, it's better we remove the anthropomorphic term intelligence, and we're dealing with forms of statistical modeling. And then discussing what is the data that we use to train them, and which kind of knowledge, which kind of indeed paradigm we expect to be produced from this data.
I mean, if I can just follow up on that question a bit, I'm sort of interested to think about it also in more directly politicized terms, because I mean, in the book, there's also a kind of line of thought running through about the way that AI functions as a tool of surveillance and social control. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about the kind of counter use of AI as a technology which might subvert or disrupt those processes of domination, let's say, through these technologies.
Yeah, I think I'm not the right person to answer this, because you have already a great project of counter activism around this tool. If you think forensic architecture or the work of Adam Harvey, how image recognition is being used, for instance, indeed as AI tools in human rights investigation and in the mapping of war crimes. So I think there are examples, but they are not my practice. So I'm not very confident to talk about somebody else's project. But if you take forensic architecture as a good example of how they've been always taking a lot of digital tools and turn them upside down. Often technologies developed by the military for surveillance and turned upside down to produce evidence for trial. So to rebuild the forum, to rebuild and to somehow reappropriate forensics indeed as a tool for grassroots activism, for community activism.
If I may jump on this quickly, I mean, there are tools now that enable, that use software precisely to blur and to, disrupt effectively facial recognition and so on. But, it's still within the framework of those technologies to start with, which is rather unfortunate. Yeah.
Let's make a parenthesis here. I think what I discuss sometimes also with my students, the fact that the big tech companies are beyond face recognition. The fact that Facebook, for instance, discontinued the use of face recognition in the internal algorithm. They use image recognition to filter content, pornography, violent content, and so on. But they remove face recognition as one of the features, for instance, to recognize your friends. I think what they're interested, as we also mentioned at the beginning of this talk tonight, they're interested in mapping social relations, social behavior. I think the face somehow, in my opinion, is like fading away as a center of attention. For power, maybe, of course, is still important, but I think there are forms of control that are much more sophisticated. The so-called pattern of life analysis, right? That what is used by many armies today around the world to select military targets. And the way the pattern of life analysis is at the center of the mapping of behavior of consumer behavior, and also of the trajectories that riders and drivers do when they operate within the gig economy. So I think there are other forms of control that are much more subtle, invisible, and quite deployed around us, and they're much, pernicious, more pervasive than face recognition itself.
Great. So the next question is from Syed Mustafa Ali, and Audrey, do please jump in to answer these as well. So Syed says, I was intrigued by your reference to the metabolic and would like to ask whether you consider the political economy of AI as automated labor in relation to political ecology understood in world systems terms, involving flows of material resources mediated through what Alf Hornborg refers to as the master technology of money.
Yeah, I think today we see AI as part of the world systems. And I think in the technosphere debate, we use, this model of spheres. We have the biosphere, the geosphere connected to the technosphere, and we add also, more recently the infosphere. The historians of science like to add the noosphere, and other historians of science like Jürgen Rehn, previous director of Department 1 Max Planck, wanted to add the ergosphere, so the sphere of social relation and production of knowledge from below that is connected to all the spheres. And today when we discuss the ecological issue, we see the relation between all these levels. And clearly AI belongs to the technosphere and the infosphere, right? So it's material, but also dealing with the information and accumulating knowledge and data. And this is the way I think to see, to position AI within this complexity, and maybe also to make a kind of cost, to make a calculation of the metabolic costs. Today we know that the other side of AI is the energy, water consumption of the data centers. So I think aside from labor costs, aside from social costs, there are also costs in terms of natural resources to run this planetary infrastructure. And yeah, this is another ambitious question that cannot be answered in few minutes.
Actually, we may have help from last session with Catherine Hales, who precisely was talking to us about the entanglement of all of these different layers and spheres, from ecology to social relations. And I'm putting the link to the video in the chat.
I try to save the chat for later. I hope somebody can do it.
So the next question is from Scarlett Spence, who asks, who says that they thought you mentioned Schumpeter briefly. So could you quickly say something about how he may be relevant in a unique way here?
Yeah, it was my early attempt to zoom out from the perspective of the book and to say that there are different theories of automation. Actually, after, clarify somehow my position regarding the labor theory of automation, I would like to connect this labor theory of automation, so obsessed with the design of social relation, with something equally important, that is the economic relation within society, indeed, cost of labor cost in terms of human resources, and connecting this to what are the value theories of automation. And they said also in Marxism, within the Marxism that defines itself orthodox, there is often this reading that technology is developed because of capital interest. So capitalism, like in this new Schumpeterian view, capital selects the most fitting technology to accelerate production. And I think this position sometimes is quite agnostic to the design of technology. So it seems like technology is developed by the application of science to production from above, or because of one entrepreneur genial invention, and is unable to see how, on the contrary, technology is connected to a social fabric. I think we need to put together, value theories, labor theory, and antagonistic theory, what I called before standpoint theory, the theory that try to map the antagonistic relation of technology subjectivities, like the feminist theorists try to do. And so, this is my gesture towards a better integration of this view with an economic view. But I think I'm a bit skeptical of Schumpeterian position that I said they're popular also within Marxist circles.
Great. So the next question is from Sebastian, who is asking about the socio-technical. So would a change in the book's subtitle to socio-technical have created a shift in the main argument? And if so, which shift? So I specifically think about the role of connectionism, which might differ between a social and a socio-technical history.
No, I think socio-technical is what I describe in the introduction as my methodology, but I usually technically, when you talk about the social history is a specific genre, but we don't have social technical history as a specific, oh, we have. But no, I don't think that changing the subtitle would change the argument that much. Is a history where I start from the social fabric and try to map that entanglement.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can jump in here and ask, Pras Biswas, maybe slightly in a tongue-in-cheek manner, mentions that you can only recognize intelligence's aspects, but you cannot define it. But, actually, this is quite a serious question. Do you think that there is such a thing as intelligence, or that,
No, we said before, I think we clarified that intelligence is always this social relation, but also you can talk about a relation between, bricks of a logic construction, of a construction within logic. Intelligence, as I said, is our relation to the world. And the best way is to use a term, another very ambivalent term like modeling. So, and if I may say something, one of the important things that intelligence is, the definition of intelligence is an historical construct. We have this problem that, for instance, the cognitive science approach, and also, for instance, Margaret Bowden's monumental history of AI takes for granted the idea of intelligence or intelligence per se, while intelligence is always related to specific social historical moment, is often connected to hierarchies of class, gender, and race within society. So it's used also as a way to describe our position in society. So we cannot separate the definition of intelligence with a political view of society. But this is not my theory. I would say is the theory of the historians of the idea of intelligence.
Yeah, so I mean, Daniels has a related question, which is that in the pursuit of automation embedded in our psyche, is the pursuit of automation embedded in our psyche because of the principles of education based on a hegemonic epistemology? And is this something that you're aspiring to tackle in your work in Venice?
Sorry, could you repeat, because you don't hear my birds and my environmental noise. Could you repeat the question briefly?
So the question is this pursuit of an automation that would be embedded in our psyche? So looking for the secrets of intelligence, I presume, in our psyche, in the brain, because of the principles of education based on a hegemonic epistemology. So do you think that drive to discover this kind of naturalistic conception of intelligence, is that somehow based on the dominant form of epistemology that we have?
Yes, I think so. I think especially if we look at computer science developments, we have quite a normative epistemology there. And I think the critical epistemologies came in the last century from other sectors. And I think, for instance, to what French philosophy, French thought did after World War II. I mean, it was the whole tradition of philosophy obsessed indeed with psychopathology, madness, schizophrenia, with the mapping of the abnormal mind that I think should be taken today as a sort of gigantic counter argument against our current obsession for computational rationality. So if we compare to this historical momentum, the literature that's been developed is quite astonishing, the friction. And I think this is, so we have different epistemologies of intelligence, of the mind, of the abnormal mind, of mental abilities and disability that have been around us. And I admit that I know only the Western discourse and not other discourses, other traditions of thought. But I think, we have to, I think we have the tools, we have the sources, we have the tradition to imagine alternative epistemologies of intelligence. And this is one of the things I would like to do in my project in Venice.
And perhaps, one of the final questions on which we can leave you this evening is to wonder, I mean, as Macaulay mentions, to explore the ideological residue that seems appended to the promise of AI today, specifically that kind of mystical, ultimate, panacea, basically, of AI. And he writes, if the 20th century in mathematics and physics suggested that there is a necessary incompleteness and uncertainty at the heart of science, how is AI and the builders of these machines suggesting that even these obstacles could be solved?
Yeah, I think if we look at the history of mathematics, also the idea of incompleteness by Gödel, it's clear that even if we take a good part of mathematics, that could be very helpful to describe the intrinsic and internal limit of AI. So it's interesting, as I said, there is this strange anthropomorphism, sometimes fueled by some scientists, some mathematicians themselves, that they have projection over the power of building autonomous machines. But the history of mathematics itself contains sometimes antidotes to describe the mathematical limits of AI today. Mathematical limits in terms of computation, but also in terms of statistical approximation and so on. So I think, yeah, somebody could do a proper internalist critique of AI without even reaching the social the social field.
Can I jump quickly on that? Because this is something you mentioned in your conclusion that intrigued me too. Do you think we are close to reaching the limits of AI from a, logical point of view, from an exponential, you talk about the explosion, but also the fact that we will be running out of energy to be able to process all of these modelings?
Yeah, I don't know, but I think there are like limits in the energy infrastructure in terms of computing power. For computer will become more and more powerful. But probably there is an epistemic limit also. And if we keep on using the technique we use now, that is indeed, multidimensional analysis, manipulating a gigantic vector space, it's something that has a limit in itself. Then, of course, we can have fantastic machines to automate language translation, as probably we are reaching. But then, as I said, we have to analyze the application of this thing to understand the limit. The limit is still social, right? When you have the multitude of users connected to one data center in Utah. Let's see what will be the configuration. I mean, the materialistic configuration of these tools.